And so the first step would be, and again, this is before investing, and I'll get into kind of retirement plans at work. I think that's important too. But the first step would be to pay off, starting with your highest interest debt. And that's almost always a credit card debt. And that's what I would consider a bad debt, is that it carries the highest interest rates because you could easily default on it. People do all the time, but the credit card companies just ruin your credit. And you don't want bad credit at our age. You want good credit to be able to get a mortgage and a car payment and everything. But that is really, credit card debt is the first place that I would look to pay off, because when interest rates are 15, 16, 17% on credit cards, there's that snowball effect where even if you're making, especially if you're making the minimum payment, but even if you're paying a good chunk off every month, just the interest is going to continue to grow, and it eventually just gets to be completely unmanageable.
All right. What's up, everybody? Welcome back to Nick Carrier's Best You podcast. I am super excited to bring you guys a very valuable episode, especially with the times that we're in right now, with the one and only Tom Peterson. Tom, I want to start off by just thanking you with being here with me today.
Thanks for having me, Nick.
Yeah, of course. So to introduce you real quick, Tom Peterson is a financial advisor with Raymond James Financial Services in Clearwater, Florida. And like I said, I think this is really important to be talking about right now. It's always important to talk about financial stuff and gives people a little bit of help and guidance and practical tips and stuff like that. But with coronavirus and with quarantine life, I know it's even more so at the top of people's minds with their concerns that they might have about their own financial well-being. So I appreciate you spending the time and bringing that value to us today. The way I want to start is just saying, what's kind of the biggest question, comment, or concern that people are coming to you guys with right now during this time?
Well, I think, a lot of it is everything that we're going on with the virus is unique in that people have a health concern and a health crisis that the whole country and the whole world is going to, on top of an economic crisis. And, the stock market has come down quite a bit. There's a lot of uncertainty. There's, record unemployment. Things that normally take several months happened in the period of just a couple of weeks. So it's been a huge adjustment for everybody to get used to. And I think the main concerns that people that our clients in particular have is they want to know that they're safe with their investments, and they want to know, I guess, which risks to look out for in terms of if we do get into a recession, which we pretty much are in one now. What type of ways can they mitigate risk, and basically, are they okay for the long term? Because a lot of our clients are retirees, and so they don't have employment income coming in, and so really they just want to know if what the impact to the stock market and the impact to their investments is, what that does for their future. And it's really an unprecedented time. Yeah, everyone's been using the word unprecedented,
right?
But it's really been a pretty remarkable change in just about everything in daily life. So I think people are first worried about keeping themselves healthy. That's the number one concern of our clients right now. And so I think in a time where people would usually be a lot more worried about their accounts or the stock market, we have two things distracting us, and the priority always takes over with health. So, most of our clients have been able to stay healthy and, kind of put their perspectives. They've been through bull and bear markets before. They've been to 2008 and 2001. And so, they know that things will eventually come back from this too.
Okay. So I'm going to flip the coin on you, because you are in the younger demographic, and we haven't necessarily experienced as much of a decline like this in our lifetime necessarily. Like, we've seen the financial crisis in 2008, but we weren't necessarily in the old enough to kind of be in that state of like, what's going on? What am I going to do about this? So ever since this happened, what's been maybe your personal biggest concern? Because you are a financial advisor, so you have a little bit more knowledge about how to handle things. What's maybe your biggest concern right now?
Well, my biggest concern, I would say in terms of the economy and everything that I just see on my day-to-day life, is really just the economic destruction that we've seen in terms of jobs and especially small businesses. And, even though, I'm in Florida, so a lot of our restaurants have been able to stay open to do takeout, and certain businesses have been able to stay open. But really just the mom and pop businesses, and all the restaurants and all of the closed down doors that I see around is really pretty scary, in the sense that the government provided, they passed a $2.2 trillion fiscal stimulus, and that was meant to be kind of a bridge loan to both to individuals through the direct payments that people received, and also some type of forgivable loan and grants to small businesses. But I think my biggest concern is how long this period of lockdowns and social quarantine and social separation continues. Because I think for a lot of businesses, what the government had did with the stimulus that they passed would be able to get them through a few months of this. But if we continue to see a bigger wave of this outbreak, or more economic stress from not just the US but globally, the impact of this, I think that a lot of small businesses are going to have a really hard time opening up again. I think it's already that way. You're going to see a lot of businesses just close permanently, and
Yeah.
and that is sort of the natural effects of capitalism. To some degree, is that certain businesses eventually get washed out, and that brings room for new opportunity and new businesses and new growth. But we've never seen anything where every single sector of everybody has been affected by this in some way. And so my biggest concern is just how long this lasts, and what it does to small businesses, and really just the ability for people to work. It was crazy that we had come from almost full employment, record employment, of just about any metric you look at on the stock market or on the economy. Things were rolling along so well, and in the span of 2 or 3 weeks, everything was just flip flopped. And so it's just remarkable to see. And so I think really, that would be it.
Yeah. How about with you like on a more personal level? Have there been things that you were like, I need to do this differently moving forward because something like this could happen again down the road in the future? And like there's always going to be, the market volatility going up and down. Are there different things that you're saying to yourself now that I'm like, I need to do maybe something differently to maybe protect myself down the road from something similar to this, maybe not on this magnitude and this scale, but protect myself from something similar like this happening down the road?
Sure. Yeah, I think this is a good wake up call for myself, in that I consider my job to be pretty stable. Even through as a financial advisor, if the economy goes through a rough patch and we go through a recession, that's where people need financial advice the most. And so I was never really concerned about losing my job or anything like that. But when this all happened, it really made me wake up to say, even if you are in a job that isn't directly impacted by an economic recession, and it is in some ways a financial advisor, anything can happen. And so for me personally, I realize the importance of maybe increasing my emphasis on an emergency fund, just to have some cash for a rainy day. And also, it made me kind of reevaluate my financial position in terms of debt, because I was thinking about buying a house in the last couple months, and this really made me rethink. I was sitting here thinking, gosh, the economy is great, interest rates are low, the outlook for the housing market is great. What could go wrong? And I guess it was a good wake up call to remind me that anything is possible, and when you think everything is perfect, is when you should really look out for the unexpected.
Yeah, no, I like that a lot. That's a big takeaway for sure. A reality check for all of us, I think. So you had mentioned, the re-emphasis kind of in your mind about that rainy day fund, about that emergency fund. Let's kind of talk towards somebody who's younger and they don't have a whole lot of the bank account. They might have a little bit of savings, but in their mind, they're like, I want to start building up my savings account. I want to start making decisions now to build up my wealth for the future. What is maybe the first thing that I need to do in order to start doing that?
Yeah, so I would always suggest prioritizing a rainy day fund or an emergency fund. And
And I know we've used the emergency and rainy day fund term, but let's go ahead and define that for everybody else too.
Yeah, so the kind of the rule of thumb is that you should have between 3 and 6 months of your expenses saved. And so really you should ask yourself, if I lost my job today, if all of my income were to stop, how long can I go with paying my necessary bills? Your rent or your mortgage or your car payment, all the stuff that you need to pay. Can I make it somewhere between 3 to 6 months? And so that's kind of the gauge. And there's no perfect answer whether it's six. Maybe you're a little bit more conservative or risk averse, and you just feel security having a little bit more cash in a savings fund or a rainy day fund. Or if you think that your job is relatively stable and you'd get through that time period okay, maybe you can err on the side of 3 months. But somewhere between that is what you should start with before even thinking about making some kind of investment or buying stocks or anything like that.
Okay, gotcha. Yeah, I really like that tip for people because it's such a practical tip. It's like get a number for your monthly expenses, multiply it by 3 to 6 depending on your comfort level, and then get to that number. Okay, let's say the person gets to that number, then what's next?
Exactly. What's next? So I would say, for somebody who I kind of would take it in two directions. I think the first step after you have your rainy day fund or your emergency fund would be to look at paying off debt. And there is sort of a spectrum of debt. I would say that there's good debt, there's some middle tier debt, and then there's bad debt. And so the first step would be, and again, this is before investing, and I'll get into kind of retirement plans at work. I think that's important too. But the first step would be to pay off, starting with your highest interest debt. And that's almost always the credit card debt. And that's what I would consider bad debt, is that it carries the highest interest rates because you could easily default on it. People do all the time, but the credit card companies just ruin your credit. And you don't want bad credit at our age. You want good credit to be able to get a mortgage and a car payment and everything. But that is really, credit card debt is the first place that I would look to pay off, because when interest rates are 15, 16, 17% on credit cards, there's that snowball effect where even if you're making, especially if you're making the minimum payment, but even if you're paying a good chunk off every month, just the interest is going to continue to grow, and it eventually just gets to be completely unmanageable. So after you've prioritized and set some money aside, whatever that might be, the first focus should always be credit card debt. And then, depending on what you are looking to do, you could also look at paying off what I would consider kind of the middle tier debt, which is student loan debt and car payments, depending on where the interest rates are, really. And I think that's important for people to get, is to say, if you have cash, or what I like to think of it as is assets and liabilities. And assets is what you own, and liabilities is what you owe. And so if you have some money in cash and you're looking at what to do with it, let's say I have a student loan debt that's at 5%, a student loan. You need to look at that as saying, okay, I can pay off this debt, which I am paying 5% to have that money lent to me, and compare that to what am I doing with my cash. And if the cash is just sitting in your savings account with interest rates low right now, it's practically earning probably less than 1% on your average savings account, then it might make sense to start working towards paying off some of that debt, especially like a car loan, which is kind of a depreciating asset. That is also a decent idea. Now, I wouldn't get carried away with paying off debt. And it really depends on where your interest rate is. I have a car loan. The interest rate is like 2.2%, which is ridiculously low. And so, if you compare that to what can I do with my cash, if I had it just sitting in a savings account, then it might make sense to pay that off. So I think that's really the context that people should look at when they think of paying off debt, is that you are earning a guaranteed rate of return on that interest rate of your debt by paying it off with your cash.
Gotcha. Yeah, I've really liked how you distinguish the difference between you own and then you owe, and you want to make sure you compare the interest rates that you owe on the thing compared to the thing that you own. And if the thing that you own can earn more interest than the thing that you owe, then you don't necessarily have to pay that off as quickly, I guess is what I'm understanding.
Yeah, and I think everyone has a different opinion on paying off debt.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a lot of different philosophies on debt management, and I think there's no right or wrong answer, because in terms of financial advice, and that's a very broad scope of what you read on the internet, financial personalities that you see on TV or that you hear on the radio, or maybe personal finance programs that you can go into. There's a lot of people that would probably disagree with me and say you should pay off all of your debt before you think about doing anything else. And so I think that there's a lot of different ways of looking at it, and and there really isn't a right or wrong answer as long as you have some kind of justification behind what you're doing.
Yeah, I think that's really important because I feel like, the way we're talking about it in terms of like interest rates and percentages and what's going to cost you more, what's going to earn you more, that sort of thing. Like that's very like the justification is because the math makes sense. But another justification is like somebody else is like, I'm not going to do that math. I'm not going to put in the time to actually calculate that thing out. So I need to do basically advice with another good justification that works better for me.
Exactly. I think it really comes down to your own values with debt. I think people are just some people, depending on how they were raised, are just do not like the idea of having debt or paying interest. Some
Mm,
people are just plainly irresponsible with debt, and as soon as they pay it off, it'll find some way of coming back. And I think, and there's also some people that like to look at things mathematically. And so I would say if you're thinking about, starting at the highest interest debt, paying that off first, and then comparing it to what you earn on your cash and what you could pay off debt, that's more of your analytical type of thinker, to where they like things to work out mathematically. And then I think on the flip side of that, I'm sure a lot of people are familiar with Dave Ramsey and his philosophy, and he would completely disagree with that. And he would say that you should pay off all of your debt as quickly as possible, because as soon as you are debt free is when you can begin to build your wealth. It shouldn't really be at the same time. And so his philosophy, which I think is also very valid, and it makes sense for a lot of people, is to start at the smallest debt that you have, because and I think his plays more into the behavioral finance and in the psychology of money and paying off debt, because people get really overwhelmed when they have 4 or 5 different credit cards that they're paying off. Each one carries a different percent interest. They got a student loan over here and another one over here, and just all of those payments at different times of the month can just overwhelm people. And so his philosophy is to pay off the smallest one first, regardless of the interest, because that is a win. You're eliminating that one credit card bill or debt payment that you have, and that frees up your mind psychologically, and there's an emotional benefit to it. And I think that really resonates with a lot of people, and especially if you aren't into the analytical side of things, that might make even more sense for people. So I know Dave Ramsey is a really popular, a lot of people my age I've heard have gone through his program and have gotten a lot from it. And so there's no right or wrong answer to it. Both will get you to a better place, financially.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head in terms of saying that really works well for people who are not necessarily on the analytical side of things, because it does play much more into the psychology. It's like, okay, I got this checkbox completed and out of the way. Now I can move on to this one. And a lot of times when it comes to finances, people, if they don't have guidance, they need it as simplistic as possible. And when it's like as simplistic as like pay this one off and then that one and that one, sometimes that can work better for people. But like you said, if you have somebody who can help you a little bit more on the analytical side, purely for math justifications, it can make more sense to do it the way that we had kind of discussed a little bit beforehand.
Yeah, and I think as a financial advisor, when our clients come to us and talk about paying off different debt, because we have the ability to work with them, to explain things to them, and talk to them every couple of weeks and kind of walk them through it a little bit more. I think I can give people a little bit more confidence with the more analytical side than they might not normally want to do if they were searching on the computer for answers, or
Right.
going through, just looking up on websites. And so what I would suggest to people really is to find a source of personal finance information, one source, whether that be someone like Dave Ramsey, or there's a couple people that are in personal finance or even websites that have a kind of a consistent message and really focus on that. Because if you look long enough on several different topics, some things are black and white, but there's a lot of topics that really come down to personal opinion. And I think it's important that people get one source of information, commit to that, and really, just to commit to follow through on whatever this person says, assuming that they're credible and they know what they're doing.
Right. No, I like that a lot, because a lot of times if you only take bits and pieces from a lot of different people, it's the justifications from all those people don't necessarily align. So I think that's a really good point.
Yeah.
Okay, so we kind of took a first couple steps. You said, prioritize a rainy day fund, back to simplification, back to the starting with a rainy day fund, and then, kind of evaluating your debt and come up with a game plan that's justified for whatever reason you decide. Then what after that can I do to start building my wealth?
Yeah, so I would say the next step would be to start investing through your retirement plan at work. And this is usually either a 401k or some type of profit sharing plan where you're making a contribution yourself. And especially if your employer offers some type of match. That is something where even if you didn't plan on saving, let's say you wanted to prioritize paying off your debt first. And I personally think everybody should at least contribute a little bit into a 401k plan. I think it's just a good habit to get into. A lot of them automatically enroll you, so you have to opt out of it. So, even if it's just a couple percent each year, the compounding effect over time will really do a lot for you. So going back to the employer match, though, if you have an employer match, you should certainly invest at least that amount in order to get that match, because that is free money. And that is the best guaranteed return on your money that you'll ever find. If your employer matches you 1% for the first 1,000 or first 1% or whatever like that, it's essentially a 100% return. So that's a good place to start. And really, I think in terms of savings, if you want to build wealth for your future, the best way to do that is to owning companies, which if you think about anyone who has built wealth, or the big successful people, JP Morgan or Rockefeller or Bezos or Zuckerberg, everybody owned a percentage of a business. And the stock market gives us a very effective, efficient way of owning very small individual pieces of businesses, and really it lets you participate in the entire growth of the U.S. economy. And so over time, especially if you start young, that is really where you will build your wealth. And in terms of, there's tax advantages to the 401k too. So there's the tax advantages, and then there's also, I think, the behavioral side of it, and that you can't get to that money until you're retired or until you're 59 and a half without, having to pay tax and getting a penalty on it. So I think it's really good for people with their long-term savings to get it out of reach, or at least know that you're going to get your hand slapped if you try to go take it out early. And so I'm a big fan of kind of behavioral things, of little mind tricks, psychological or mental accounting. And I think saving in a retirement plan is going to be the best way to build your long-term wealth, and especially to retirement, if you one day want, stop working and continue to support that lifestyle and reach your goals eventually.
Gotcha. Awesome. So in retirement plans, a lot of times people have the option to do the traditional kind of IRA and 401k, and then the Roth IRA. I want you to talk to a little bit about kind of what the differences simply are between those two, and how somebody can go about deciding which one I should put how much into.
Yeah. So simply, I'll try to explain it as simply as possible. Some of the tax terms, it can get a little bit confusing. But essentially, when you're contributing to a traditional 401k, you are that is called a deductible contribution. So the government is basically saying money that you are contributing to this account, or the IRS is saying money that you're contributing to this account, we would normally tax you on your income before you were able to start investing it. But in a traditional 401k or even a traditional IRA, the IRS is saying, we'll let you take that money pre-tax, and contribute it to that account. So when you put that money in, it is your contribution or your part of it. And it's also part of the IRS's money that they normally would have taken had that money been taxed. And so it allows you to invest a bigger amount in your retirement account, with the idea that that will help grow and compound. And so eventually, when you go to take it out in retirement, that money is then taxed. So essentially, with the traditional 401k, and this is where it gets confusing, is that the money is not taxed now. They let you put all of it in the account, and you pay taxes on it when you take it out. And the idea is that when you're working, your tax bracket and your income is higher than it would be in retirement. So if you're in your working age, when you're 30s, 40s, is your tax bracket is going to be higher than when you go to take it out in retirement, ideally, or usually it's a little bit lower. Now, compared to, does that make sense, or is there anything I need to?
No, I think the to me, I think the couple of biggest points is that you get to put more money in now, but it's taxed later. And then the other big thing was that you kind of do that because you put more money in now, because instead of being taxed at a higher percentage now, you get to be taxed at a lower percentage later.
Right. And that's, I think, the concept of it. Not everybody has a lower tax bracket when they're in retirement.
Right. That's just kind of like more of the ideal scenario, I would guess.
Exactly. And also, I think with another point is that all of your gains from here, I'm 30. So all of my gains on a contribution to a 401k, when I go to pull them out in 30 years or 40 years, all of my gains are then taxed too. And so that is the biggest difference when you compare it to a Roth 401k or a Roth IRA. A Roth IRA means it's an after-tax contribution. And so instead of paying or contributing to the account pre-tax, instead of paying or contributing that more or higher amount, the IRS is saying, you're going to pay tax on this income now, contribute it to this account, and it will grow tax-free, and it will be tax-free in retirement. And so that's why a Roth IRA is such an advantage when you're younger, and especially before, if you expect your income to increase throughout your career, you can pay tax on that money now, ideally or hopefully at a lower rate, and it will grow tax-free for the rest of your life, and it's tax-free in retirement. And so the Roth IRA, when you have more time to contribute, or I'm sorry, more time to let the money compound and to let the money grow, really makes a lot of sense. And so, I think at the same time, though, both of these types of accounts are also based on the current tax code. And in my opinion, the traditional IRA isn't great for younger people because, you have so much time to let that money grow, and all of those gains are taxed at your normal income rates. Where in a regular account, it actually would be at a slightly lower rate, which is capital gains, which is for a different discussion. So the Roth IRA, tax-wise, is a better deal for younger people, but it does also eat into your refund, and it does eat into your after-tax income that you get paid from your paycheck, because you are paying taxes on that amount. So if you max out your Roth 401k, that's $18,000 that you're paying taxes on when you do your tax return, compared to if you maxed out your traditional 401k, you're not paying taxes on that $18,000 that you contributed to.
Gotcha. So, one of the things that's kind of concerning both of the traditional and the Roth is what you perceive the tax rate for yourself is going to be when you're older, when you retire. How should somebody go about kind of thinking about what is my tax rate going to be when I retire? Because again, very simplified, there's a lot more detail than this. It's like, okay, right now, if I feel my tax rate is going to be higher when I retire, I want to focus on a little bit more on the Roth, and vice versa with the traditional. So what's maybe something someone can do to determine what they think their tax rate when they retire is going to be?
Yeah, I mean, you can obviously look at what you think to be the trajectory of your career. And I think most people, if you know that you're going to have the same job and, maybe that there's something to compare it to, or if you're not sure what you're going to be doing for the rest of your career, there's really no way to know. And at the same time, there's also no way to know what tax rates are going to be for people that far out into the future. The tax rates right now are relatively cheap. Since 2017, individual tax rates have been really low. If you compare that to the 70s, and I think I'm not really an expert on the historical tax rates, but decades ago, tax rates were extremely high. So they could be extremely high in the future. They could be extremely low in the future, and there's really nowhere to know. And that's why some of this is sort of a guess and a hope of where the tax code will be. But I think overall, it's a safe bet to at least do a combination of 50% Roth, 50% traditional, or some kind of combination, just so that you have a little bit in an account that will grow tax-free, and there's going to be tax-free distributions. And at the same time, you have a little bit where, it's a pre-tax contribution like a traditional 401k, and that'll be taxed in the future. Who knows? Maybe they'll change the traditional 401k or IRA rules to where it's a little bit more favorable. It's been discussed, but it's just impossible to know. And I think that's a good way. I think most people would just maybe split it up and to say 50-50 or 60-40 or however you want to do it, and just decide that way. But if you're younger, you certainly want to have some amount that's contributed to a Roth. And if you're going to pick one to contribute more of, I would suggest more on the Roth side. But if somebody's older and closer to retirement, then maybe the traditional 401k could make sense.
Gotcha. Well, I do probably a little bit later towards the end. I want to maybe get maybe a quick discussion in about kind of like stock market and stuff like that, and some things there. But before I get into that, I kind of want to discuss one of the the bigger issues that everybody, especially on the younger side, is thinking about. But even older people starting families and stuff like that is buying a house. And I think that going into buying a house with the right strategy is super important for anybody, and know what you're doing and prepare for it accordingly. So what should somebody be doing right now if they're thinking, I know I want to buy a house, but I don't have any idea of how I should start preparing for that? What should I do? What's the first thing I need to do?
Yeah, so I would say the first place to start would be to have a very accurate understanding of your expenses on not just one particular month, but really over what you would consider to be a normal period of maybe 5 to 6 months, and that's different than a budget, because a lot of people, including myself, I'll set myself a budget where I'm going to spend this much on eating out and this much on food and this much on shopping or clothes, and you never really follow it. So I think the best way to really get an idea of where your expenses are at is to use one of the apps. There's a lot of really good ones. Mint is the one that I use, where you can categorize your spending. It hooks right up to your bank accounts and your checking accounts. From what I understand, it's very secure. It's the same company that does TurboTax. And you can categorize at the end of each week, or I try to, but I go in and categorize each transaction. And whether it's, groceries or eating out, or, going to a concert or going to a sporting event, they all fit into categories. And then at the end, you get a picture of several different months that you can kind of average together to see where your fixed expenses are and what they call your non-discretionary expenses that you can't get away from, that you always need to pay every month. And that's usually your bills and your insurance payments and, food and all that stuff. And then I try to separate where my discretionary payments are. Where's my fluff? How much do I spend when I go out to an eat, or go to a bar or a brewery, or go to a sporting event, or go on vacation? And that's the area that you can kind of see where you can cut out a little bit if you need to. But I think it's very important to have a realistic understanding of your expenses. And then that way you can say, okay, of how much I earn, how much of this could I afford to spend on a house? And so the two ratios that they use in financial planning, and they're the same ratios that the banks and lenders look at when they look at someone's creditworthiness is they call debt to income ratios. And the first one is that you shouldn't spend more than 28% of your gross income, meaning your income before taxes, on your total housing expense. And so that includes everything really that your mortgage includes. So principal and interest, which is the two components of your mortgage payment or your debt payment, and property taxes and homeowners insurance. And so all of those combined shouldn't be more than 28%. And then the second one is a 36% rule. And that brings in all of the other debt payments that you have. So in addition to your housing payments, it brings in credit card payments, student loans, car payments, just your total debt. And that's really the bank's way of seeing, okay, is this compared to what this person makes in income? They're pretty much saying, and kind of the rule of thumb is that once you get higher than 36% debt payments to your income, income can eventually, or your debt payments can eventually become an issue, and you might not be able to maintain that. And so that is really, I think, when someone's saying, okay, how much house can I afford? I think the biggest mistake is going to the bank or a lender, getting pre-approved and saying, okay, there's my limit. Because in a good economy, the banks might even go a little bit higher than that. And so, that's a big part of how 2008 happened, is that you didn't really have to prove that you had a great job or that you had a lot of savings. The banks had very easy lending standards, and anybody could get a mortgage for any amount, or at least maybe more than what they could afford. And then, how things turned out. So really use those rules as a gauge. And with real estate, I like to be a little bit more conservative, where 28% should kind of be your maximum. And ideally, maybe you want to be closer to 20 if you can. But, maybe if you also don't have student loan debt or car debt or car payment, maybe you can go a little bit over, that, or at least maybe touch that 28%. But those are two important ratios that are important to look at when you think about what you can afford in terms of the house price. And the second thing is to make sure your credit score is in a good position. Actually, I'll kind of circle back first, though. Did you have any questions, or if there's anything I need to clear up on the debt to income?
No, I think it's pretty simple. I guess I'll try to restate it again simplistically to make sure that I understand it for my own. Is basically you want to start by making sure you have like you said, a realistic idea of what your expenses are, and then break down that 28% and the 36%. Like look at kind of what you're making, and look at the potential of what you would have to pay on that, and make sure that the percentages line up.
Right. And that's just a quick way of saying, okay, I was thinking about buying a house that was, $250,000. Is that in my price range?
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people, when they're getting into the stages of purchasing a house, which I was thinking, I'm kind of getting ready to be in that stage too. And these are the things that I'm going through, is to get a good handle on my expenses, seeing, how much house I can afford. It gives you just a good rule of thumb to know where you should be looking at.
Let's actually go into, I kind of want to do a specific example with the percentages and with some numbers real quick to give everybody maybe a little bit more, it seems a little bit more tangible. Let's say, they're looking at buying a house and they see the house is $250,000, just because, you brought that up. And then kind of what do they need to be looking at after that? Like getting into what should my down payment be, and compared to how much interest I might have to pay, compared to how much income I might be bringing in, kind of a thing. So let's I kind of want to evaluate a few of those numbers in a way that makes sense, I guess, for the listeners.
Yeah. And I think, the tough part about buying a house, especially when you compare to renting, is the complexity of all of the moving parts that go into it.
Yeah.
And, there's the interest expense, which luckily, since 2008, I think just yesterday, 30-year mortgage hit an all-time low. So that makes houses a lot more affordable. I think a lot of people, don't realize how much of each payment that they're making on their mortgage, especially in the beginning, is actually going towards interest. So when interest rates fall 1% like they have, that makes a lot of houses more affordable for the same payment. So in terms of interest rates, we have that working for us. And there's an overall kind of downtrend in interest rates. And I would have imagined that would continue, especially with everything going on. But so the cost of taking out a mortgage has been relatively cheap. In terms of down payment, there it comes back to the personal preference, like I mentioned.
Yeah.
I read an article the other day. It caught my eye. It's like, you should not buy a house if you can't afford a 15-year mortgage and put 20% down. And I would argue that that's taking a lot of things. It's true if you think debt is absolutely evil, but at the same time, you also aren't really taking as much of advantage as you can of the historically low interest rates that are being offered. If a bank is going to lend you $250,000 at 3% interest, years down the road, what if interest rates are a lot higher? That's a really good deal to have 3% interest when maybe a mortgage in 10 years from now could be 5% or 6%. So it all comes down to personal preference in terms of a down payment. I would say, to be on the safer side, you want as big of a down payment as you can, I guess. I think a lot of people, I would say on the conservative side, they say you want 20%. But I think for a lot of people, if you really want to buy a house, 20% down payment just isn't really realistic. A lot of people just aren't going to be able to cough up that much cash. And I think the biggest mistake that you can do is to spend all of your cash on a down payment where you have some immediate equity in the house. But then you run into a bunch of move-in expenses, a bunch of unexpected expenses as soon as you get in, and you end up racking up $5,000-$10,000 on a credit card at 15%.
Yeah.
In hindsight, that's not a very good situation. So you don't want to spend all of your cash on a down payment. I would say the biggest risk because you can go, I think 3% with a 30-year conventional mortgage is possible, and that's on the really lower side. And it has the potential to backfire on you in the sense that, let's say if you bought a house right before a rough patch in the economy, or even a couple months ago, let's say, housing prices come down 10%. If you only had 3% down payment, you are starting out your mortgage with very little equity, meaning that what you actually owe or what you own compared to what you owe is very small. And so if house prices come down, now all of a sudden you're underwater. You have negative equity. You owe more than what that house is worth. So when you have a very small down payment, you run the risk, if house prices come down, which they can, you run the risk of having a hard time getting out of that house when you want to. And that's what the really difficult part of 2008 is that people didn't put a lot of money down on a house. Housing prices crashed and everyone was underwater. They had negative equity. People owed $350,000 on their mortgage and it was worth $250,000. And so to sell that house, you need to cough up $100,000, or you have to foreclose and go that route. And so that is the risk of buying a house with a small down payment is housing prices come down. But at the same time, you could get lucky in the sense that if you bought a house 5 years ago and put nothing down, you'd be okay. You would have already built a lot of equity, at least in my area. Housing prices have done nothing but go up in the last several years. So,
Right.
So there's no right or wrong answer. And again, it comes back to comparing, what can I do with my cash versus what can I do by, paying down or putting a bigger down payment on my mortgage. And I think with interest rates this low, it kind of tips the scales a little bit more. And this also comes back to kind of being more analytical with it. But with low interest rates, it allows people to put a little bit less down compared to where interest rates were in the 80s. it was 18% mortgage rates. And so then it made a lot of sense to put a huge down payment down and to take out a 15-year mortgage.
Yeah. Gotcha. Well, I want to make sure I get a few more things in here before the last couple questions. Is there, I guess I'll jump right to the stock market. I want you to maybe come up with a couple of quick to-dos and maybe not to-dos when it comes to, brokerage accounts and jumping into stock market and bonds and all that kind of stuff.
Sure. Yeah. So it's definitely an interesting time to be looking at the stock market. I think with all of the brokerage companies going to zero trades, and there's also news sites like Betterment that make trading really appealing and really easy and really cheap for people. So a lot of people our age are looking at buying and selling stocks, and I think for the most part, people have gotten it right that once the market crashed, a lot of my friends are asking me, what should I be buying? So, I would say, if you're looking at investing in stocks, first, prioritize the things we talked about earlier. If you are looking to make an investment into something, that is done through, your 401k and your Roth IRA or your Roth 401k. And that's a long-term investment into the stock market and an investment to build your wealth. And so I think if you are kind of new to the stock market and new to buying and selling stocks, use small amounts and think of it as more gambling than it is an investment. Because when you're buying individual stocks, even a great company can get cut in half within the span of a couple of weeks. And so, don't invest your down payment on a house in individual stocks. Don't, invest money that you really think you're going to need in the next couple of years, because you have a much bigger risk of losing it. At the same time, you have a bigger potential to make a lot of money with individual stocks. So, I think when people are getting used to or just getting into trading individual stocks or buying and selling, maybe not day traders, but they're considering buying some, I think you can do pretty well with the old Warren Buffett quote. He said, buy when others are fearful and sell when others are greedy. And so, a lot of younger investors, I think, stepped in and bought, certain companies, the tech companies, over the last several weeks, just because they knew, hey, everyone is fearful. That's the best time to be buying stocks. And the worst thing you can do is try to chase returns and look at the stocks that have done really well over the last several years, although those have continued to do well to everybody's surprise with all the tech stocks. But the worst thing you could do is try to chase returns. And if anything, maybe look at a good company that you're familiar with that maybe has been beaten up a little bit and consider throwing a little bit of money in there. But I would suggest anyone who's looking at stocks is to think of it as a gamble and to really be careful and don't use enough money that you're not willing to lose, at least a decent percentage of it.
Gotcha. Awesome. Well, I love it. Well, before I ask the last question, Tom, I want to make sure I acknowledge you. I really appreciate you spending the time here today. I know you probably talk about this stuff all the time with a bunch of different people, and sometimes it can probably get monotonous, but I really appreciate you spending the time and bringing everybody so much great value and so many great actionable things that they can start to do right now. I know that in our conversations prior and our conversation now has given me a lot of personal value and things that I know that I can start taking action on and start doing. And I know everybody out there is going to feel the same way. Hopefully that you guys were engaged when you were listening. If you need to go back and take notes, make sure you take notes, because there's tons of practical things in here that you're going to want to make sure you're applying. So thanks so much for spending the time. And I want to make sure everybody can go and, support you and everything you're doing. Where can people go and hop on y'all's website and everything like that?
Yeah, so our website, we're actually in the middle of a refresh that you should probably see in the next month or so. We're just redoing our copyright and some of the graphics, but it's petersonwealthmanagement.com. And that's where you can see our website. I'm actually going to be starting a Twitter account soon and getting more involved with social media. And I got to say, this is my first podcast that I've ever done, and it's kind of opened my eyes up to the whole medium. I think that's really where a lot of people are going in our industry for marketing and kind of brand awareness, both podcasts and blogs. So I think you're doing a really good thing, and I might try to take some ideas from you.
Yeah, well, I appreciate it. Yeah, I think it's a great way to give quick, actionable things that people get value from, but also a way to kind of entice people to want to know a little bit more.
Yeah, exactly. Hey, also
So,
before I wanted to mention, I forgot to earlier, a good website that covers a lot of the stuff that we talked about today. It's called NerdWallet. And if you've ever searched,
I was
looking
looking
at
at
it
that
today,
today.
credit cards, that I was looking at it earlier just to get some ideas of stuff to talk about with you. And I think it started out as kind of a credit card rating website, but they really turned it into some really good information. And they had some good information on advice of buying houses and different types of accounts, savings accounts, and what to think about. So I would suggest your listeners to check out that website. I think they're really good at explaining things, and it's a good resource.
Yeah, it's funny. I had seen it a while back, but my brother brought it to my attention this morning. So it's funny that you bring that up. Well, the last question, Tom, I'm going to spin the last question a little bit differently. Usually it's more of a personal question, but I want to spin it a little bit more towards the kind of finances, since that's been our topic. But the question is, I think that getting closer to the best version of yourself is a constant journey. And I think it's a unique journey. I think that the way that I get closer to the best version of myself is going to be a little bit different than the way that you get close to the best version of yourself. But still, for you personally, what are 3 money habits that you need to be doing in order to get to the best financial version of yourself?
Good question. Good question. I would say the first would be to spend, and this is going to be different than a lot of financial advice that people hear. Spend money heavily on the things and experiences that you really, really enjoy, and cut costs, immensely on the things that you really don't care about.
Mm-hmm.
And you should prioritize what money means to you and what you want to get from it, and try to have I try to have kind of a healthy relationship with money, in that I like to travel, and I like to go on vacations, and I'll spend money on that stuff, even maybe more than some people would suggest. I won't turn down a fun trip just because I'm like, gosh, I'm trying to save up for a house or something. So, spend money on your experiences and things that you'll get out of life. I think is really important. And I think that's something that millennials have gotten pretty well down. That kind of be a theme of our generation.
Mm-hmm.
Secondly, I would say automate your finances, automate your savings, and have your bills on auto pay. If you're saving for something, or if you're putting money into an investment account, have that come out automatically, so you don't even know it, you don't see it. Use separate accounts, title them, down payment on a house, Europe vacation. Use automation and technology as your friend. And my third money habit, I would say, I'm trying to think. My third one is really just to educate yourself. I think
Mm-hmm.
that's really important, and we're living in a time where we have the ability to have a lot of resources online, and we can really you have access to what people would love to be reading, back before the internet. And there's a lot of really good resources out there to educate yourself, to make wise decisions, and you can find a simple answer to just about anything if you look at it. And that's what I kind of do in my profession, but I've learned that a lot more by shopping for a house lately. I've had to read up on a lot, and I've been able to learn a lot too.
I love it. Yeah, take it upon yourself to make sure that you have the right. You kind of know the justifications behind certain things for sure. Well, I want to make sure before we finish, because of compliance reasons, if you would go ahead and
Yes,
read
I
out
have
your
some disclosures for
non-disclosure.
everybody.
Yeah.
So this podcast is provided for informational purposes only, and is not a complete description of the securities markets or developments referred to in this material. Any opinions are those of the speaker and not necessarily those of Raymond James. There's no guarantee that these statements, opinions, or forecasts provided in herein will prove to be correct. Investing involves risk, and you may incur a profit or loss regardless of the strategy selected. Keep in mind that individuals cannot directly invest in an index. An index performance does not include transaction costs or other fees, which will affect investment performance. Individual results will vary. Past performance does not guarantee future results. Raymond James and its advisors do not offer tax or legal advice. You should discuss any tax or legal matters with the appropriate professional. Securities are offered through Raymond James Financial Services, member FINRA SIPC. Investment advisory services are offered through Raymond James Financial Services Advisors. Peterson Wealth Management is not a registered broker-dealer and is independent of Raymond James Financial Services.
Awesome. Perfect. That's all we got, Tom. Appreciate it.
All right. Great talking to you, Nick. Thanks for having me on. I really enjoyed it.
Of course.